The house was quiet in a way that pressed against the chest, heavy and unforgiving. Nights stretched endlessly, and the silence between the walls felt louder than any argument I'd ever had. After the divorce, every corner of this space whispered reminders of what had been lost, of promises broken, of love that had once seemed eternal and now was just a memory dissolving into the shadows. The bed, the living room, even the kitchen table held echoes of laughter, of comfort, of closeness that had slipped through trembling fingers. At first, it was unbearable, the sudden emptiness, the hollow echo of footsteps that once carried the rhythm of shared life. Then, slowly, numbness crept in, not a cruel kind, not a screaming loneliness, but a quiet void that allowed the pain to fade just enough to survive. Touch became foreign. The warmth of skin against skin was a language no longer understood. A hand brushing against another could no longer evoke anything beyond the faintest flicker of memory, and memory itself had started to sting too much to linger. Nights passed with eyes staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks and shadows, imagining what it might have been like if things had turned out differently, if words had been softer, if forgiveness had arrived sooner. But it never did, and somewhere along that path of endless solitude, a vow formed, not out of spite, not even from bitterness, but from survival, the vow to never fall again. It was easy to believe that love had ended. That chapter had closed with a finality that didn't need explanation. There was comfort in certainty, even if that certainty was cold and lonely. The heart, once bruised, became a fortress, walls built high and heavy to guard against the ache of hope. Nights were still long, but they no longer felt unbearable. The quiet became a companion, a reminder that peace could exist without the chaos of passion. Touch was avoided, glances met with polite distance, and the faint flutter of longing was swallowed by reason. No one would be allowed close enough to pierce the defenses again. That was a promise, and the promise held. Even the simplest gestures, once taken for granted, became symbols of vulnerability. A brush of a hand in passing, a lingering look that might hint at more. Each was dissected, analyzed, dismissed. The world was full of faces, full of voices, yet none seemed capable of reaching the part of me that had known true intimacy, true closeness. There was safety in solitude, a strange, cold kind of comfort that allowed the heart to rest without fear of betrayal. Nights were endured, meals eaten alone, laughter only permitted in the memory of old photographs, soft smiles frozen in frames and albums. The vow to never fall again became a shield, forged in the quiet aftermath of love lost and the long, drawn-out mourning of the soul. Days passed in a rhythm that seemed almost ritualistic. Work, errands, fleeting conversations with neighbors or colleagues, each interaction measured, careful, contained. There was no room for passion in the measured life of someone who had learned the sting of abandonment, who had seen the fragility of desire turned to dust. Every impulse to connect, to reach out, to even entertain the possibility of closeness was suppressed. The heart, once open and tender, had learned the cruel art of self-preservation. Love, if it existed, was a dangerous thing best left untouched. Even dreams became cautious. In sleep, the warmth of a hand, the brush of lips, the laughter shared in the quiet corners of memory, all returned in fragments that woke the chest tight, the breath shallow. But even in dreams, the heart resisted. It was a war waged against desire, a battle fought in the soft, unspoken spaces of the night. And when morning came, light streaming across familiar walls, the vow stood firm. No one would be allowed past these gates again. No one would stir the embers that had long since been smothered under years of disappointment and solitude. Yet there was an ache that refused to be silenced completely. A part of the soul remembered the sensation of being wanted, of being seen, of being chosen beyond mere presence, beyond mere convenience. That part whispered in quiet corners reminded the mind that passion was not only risk but reward, that intimacy was not merely pain but possibility. The vow was strong, yes, but it was not absolute. Deep down, there lingered a faint, unacknowledged yearning, a shadow of the warmth that once had been, fragile as it was. And perhaps it was this quiet, nearly invisible spark that kept the nights from becoming unbearably empty, that reminded that even in the aftermath of heartbreak, the heart could survive. Time passed, measured not in leaps or sudden changes, but in slow, almost imperceptible moments. Days merged into nights, weeks bled into months, and the fortress held, every touch denied, every glance rebuffed, every fleeting thought of connection suppressed, reinforced the vow. It was a vow made not from anger or bitterness, but from the raw understanding of loss, from the lessons learned in quiet reflection and solitary nights. The vow to never fall again became a mantra, a steady rhythm against the chaos of longing, a guide through the labyrinth of memory and pain. And yet, even in the steadfastness of this resolve, there was a delicate tension, a knowing that the world was not static, that hearts, like seasons, could shift, and that even the most careful of fortresses could eventually be tested. The nights remained long, the touch foreign, the passion dormant, but somewhere beneath the layers of protection, beneath the walls carefully constructed in silence, there was a whisper, faint but insistent, reminding that the heart, no matter how scarred, had not entirely surrendered. The vow stood, heavy and unyielding, but the ember of memory glimmered quietly beneath, a reminder that love, once tasted, leaves an indelible mark, one that time and pain cannot erase entirely. And so the nights continued, still quiet, still heavy with absence, yet no longer completely empty. The walls were high, but even the strongest walls can one day feel the warmth of a light they never expected. It started with a glance that shouldn't have meant anything, and yet it carried a weight that neither time nor reason could ignore. There was nothing extraordinary about the room, the gathering, the people around. Yet in that ordinary moment, everything shifted. A presence brushed past, a hand lingered too long in the air, a look held just a fraction longer than politeness allowed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the chest tightened, a pulse quickened, and suddenly the quiet fortress built over years of solitude felt vulnerable, exposed. The spark was there, unexpected, unwelcome yet irresistible. For a moment, the mind tried to reason it away. It was a mistake, an illusion, a trick of the tired heart desperate for warmth. Yet the body betrayed every careful thought, every vow whispered in the dark. There was an electricity in the air, a current that traced along the skin, igniting a part that had been asleep for far too long. The touch of a hand, even across a table, sent a shiver that traveled too deep to ignore. Eyes met, and in that brief, charged second, something dormant stirred. It was a slow, smoldering recognition, an acknowledgement of longing, desire, and perhaps something more than fleeting attraction. Every movement became sharper, more intense in perception. The way a smile curved, the way a shoulder tilted under the soft glow of light, the sound of laughter, familiar, intimate, like echoes from a past life, all combined to form a rhythm that pulled, beckoned, and teased. The walls erected over years of hurt did not crumble, but they quivered, thin cracks appearing where no cracks had been permitted before. The pulse of life, the electricity of closeness, began to hum quietly, as though reminding that sensation, even after loss, could return unexpectedly. No one else noticed. The world went on. Mundane conversations flowed. People moved and laughed, but in that quiet collision of presence and attention, time slowed. There was a sharp awareness of skin, of breath, of proximity. The spark was neither shouted nor claimed. It existed in the subtle exchanges, in the invisible threads connecting two beings who had no business being drawn together yet, could not resist it. Every glance became a conversation, every unintentional brush of fingertips a statement. It was confusing, exhilarating, terrifying all at once. The heart remembered how to race, the body remembered how to respond, yet the mind hesitated, reminding that reason had always been the protector against heartbreak. Still, the spark refused to be ignored. It burned quietly, low and persistent, beneath the layers of caution, beneath the careful silence of years. It was dangerous, perhaps, but it was alive, and to feel alive after so long in cold emptiness was a revelation too powerful to dismiss. The spark ignited curiosity, an unspoken yearning for more, even as logic tried to anchor the feet firmly to the ground. Each casual touch of a hand, each shared laughter that lingered too long, became a magnet drawing closer, tugging at the heart in ways that demanded attention. The warmth of another's presence felt like sunlight on frozen skin, thawing, awakening, and teasing every sense. Desire, once thought extinct, began to rise gently, like smoke curling from hidden embers, unseen yet undeniable. It was in those small moments that awareness sharpened, the way a voice could lower just slightly, the way a gaze could linger on something trivial but intimate, the faint brush of shoulder or arm. All became a language of unspoken need. There was no rush, no overt confession, only the slow burn of recognition that something forbidden, unexpected, and utterly intoxicating was taking root. The heart, once guarded and still, began to remember the rhythm of longing, the pull of closeness, the intoxication of attention that went beyond friendship, beyond politeness. Even ordinary actions carried an unfamiliar thrill. Sharing a cup of coffee, walking side by side, lingering in casual conversation, everything became heightened, intensified by the undercurrent of connection neither had planned to feel. There was fear, certainly, of stepping too close, of allowing the spark to ignite into something more. But alongside the fear was a thrill so deep and consuming that caution felt almost irrelevant. The body responded instinctively, nerves alive, every sense alert to the subtleties of proximity, the warmth of presence, the magnetism that refused to be denied. The spark was not overwhelming, not a sudden conflagration, but a slow, methodical awakening of senses long dulled. It teased, it coaxed, it beckoned toward the possibility of connection that had been unimaginable for years. The heart, cautious yet unwilling to resist, began to dream in fragments, imagining touches, whispers, closeness that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The mind fought against it, reminding of vows and walls, but the body and soul remembered truths too ancient to ignore, that desire, intimacy, and the raw ache of connection could return when least expected. It was a delicate tension, a slow dance between caution and curiosity, between past hurt and emerging hope. The spark, though small, held a promise that the heart could still feel, that the body could still respond, that the soul could still remember joy, passion, and intimacy. Every glance, every brush of hand, every subtle proximity was a question, a challenge, an invitation whispered quietly but insistently. And in the quiet, unseen corners of the heart, a reluctant excitement took root, one that neither time nor caution could extinguish entirely. By the end of that night, the spark had transformed into something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed or ignored. It was more than attraction, it was recognition, a silent acknowledgement of a desire long dormant, a longing for connection, a reminder that even after the coldest winters of the soul, fire could awaken again. And in that moment it became clear, even the strongest walls could tremble when touched by the unexpected. It began in silence, in the kind of quiet that vibrates with anticipation. The spark had already stirred something deep, but walls built over years of pain and solitude still stood tall, heavy with the weight of caution and fear. Each heartbeat was a cautious step, each glance a question asked in silence. And yet, in that room, in that moment, the air shifted. carrying a tension that neither could ignore. Breath hitched, pulse raced, and the space between them felt impossibly small, yet filled with something vast and unspoken. The first touch was accidental, or perhaps it was fate. Fingers brushed against skin, a fleeting contact that sent ripples through nerves long dormant. It was electric, yet hesitant. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to respect the walls that had kept the heart safe for so long. But the body remembered truths the mind tried to suppress. Desire, warmth, connection. Each flowed like a hidden river, waiting for permission to surface. And slowly, tentatively, permission was given. Lips met, tentative at first, testing, exploring, seeking reassurance in the heat of proximity. It was not hurried, not desperate, but deliberate in a way that demanded attention, that drew the heart closer with each passing second. Every kiss was a quiet rebellion, a challenge to the defenses that had guarded the soul through lonely nights. Fear lingered, but it no longer dictated the rhythm. It was replaced by urgency, a longing that had been buried too deep to vanish entirely. The walls that had seemed so unbreakable began to yield, brick by brick, to the gentle insistence of touch, presence, and undeniable attraction. There was a trembling awareness in every motion. Hands found their way to shoulders, to the small of a back, lingering in places that had not felt warmth in years. A shiver passed through, the body responding instinctively to what the heart secretly desired. Breath mingled, soft sighs escaping in the rhythm of closeness. The mind tried to catalog every sensation, to measure every impulse, but the heart refused to obey reason. It surrendered, inch by inch, to something wild, uncontainable, and completely consuming. It was in those breathless moments that the realization hit. Fear and restraint were no longer masters. The chest rose and fell with urgency, the pulse quickened with excitement, and every nerve vibrated with a mixture of anticipation and longing. What had once been impossible, unimaginable, was unfolding with a quiet inevitability. Walls, carefully constructed over years of heartbreak, were crumbling under the weight of touch, of warmth, of presence. Every kiss, every sigh, every whispered word stripped away layers of loneliness that had seemed permanent. The breaking of walls was not just physical, it was emotional. Vulnerabilities long buried surfaced in tremors, in hesitant admissions, in the surrender to sensation that had been denied for too long. Each embrace was an acknowledgement that intimacy, passion, and connection were not only possible but essential. It was raw, it was honest, it was terrifying in its intensity, and yet it was undeniably liberating. The years of solitude, of quiet nights, of numbed touch, all seemed to dissolve in those moments. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into eternity, and every heartbeat felt magnified in the press of bodies, in the closeness of skin against skin. Words became unnecessary. Communication existed in the brush of a hand, the tilt of a head, the tremor of breath. The heart, once caged and cautious, now beat in rhythm with another, a symphony of longing and surrender. Walls that had once seemed essential crumbled beneath the undeniable truth of desire, beneath the heat of passion that refused to be denied. There was an intimacy beyond mere touch, beyond kisses and lingering glances. It was in the shared vulnerability, the silent acknowledgement of fear faced and set aside, the unspoken trust that emerged in the space between. Every caress was a promise, every sigh a confession. The past, with all its scars and lessons, became a distant echo, unable to hold back the intensity of the present. The body and soul moved in tandem, rediscovering sensations thought lost, tasting a closeness that was both familiar and entirely new. Fear had not vanished entirely. It lurked in corners in the memory of past hurt, but it no longer dictated the dance. Desire, connection, and the yearning for intimacy guided every motion. There was a wildness to the surrender, a thrill in letting go, a quiet, intoxicating realization that loneliness could end in ways that neither had anticipated. Every kiss, every touch, every shared breath was a small victory over isolation, over doubt, over the self-imposed walls that had kept the heart distant for so long. It was intoxicating to feel the body respond after so long in dormancy. Muscles remembered tension, nerves remembered thrill, and the soul remembered the joy of closeness that had once seemed unattainable. Each contact was a revelation, each sigh a liberation, and each lingering glance a reaffirmation that desire could return, vibrant and unashamed. The walls fell not with a crash, but gradually, beautifully, under the patient insistence of shared need and the undeniable pull of connection. In those moments, it became clear that passion was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply human. It was the release of tension held too long, the acceptance of vulnerability, the courage to let someone inside. And as the night deepened and breath mingled with whispered words and tender touches, the walls that had once seemed insurmountable disappeared entirely, leaving only the raw, unfiltered, beautiful reality of presence, touch, and intimacy. Every fear, every hesitation, every shadow of doubt had melted in the heat of that connection. The chest, once tight with caution, now expanded with exhilaration. The heart, once armored and guarded, now beat openly, fully, dangerously alive. And in the quiet aftermath, in the soft lingering of warmth and touch, it was impossible to deny what had happened. The walls had not just been cracked, they had been entirely torn down, leaving space only for truth, desire, and the awakening of something long denied. And in that surrender, there was nothing left to fear. The night unfolded slowly, almost reverently, as if the universe had paused to watch the quiet transformation of something that had long been dormant. It was more than desire now, more than the rush of passion or the heat of touch. It was a rediscovery, a gentle awakening of the soul itself. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every glance carried with it a truth that had been buried beneath years of caution, solitude, and fear. The body, once tense and guarded, relaxed entirely, not in surrender to lust alone, but in recognition of a connection that had always existed somewhere deep, waiting for permission to emerge. There was a softness in the way hands moved, a tenderness that spoke louder than words could ever hope to. The kisses were slower now, deliberate, not driven by need but by recognition, acknowledgement of the loneliness that had been endured, the longing that had been denied, the vulnerabilities that had been hidden. Each touch became a conversation, each caress a confession, and each whispered word a promise not just of pleasure, but of trust. There was no rush, no urgency, only the patient unfolding of something sacred, something profound, something far more enduring than mere physical desire. Eyes met, and in that gaze, the years of isolation and guarded heartache melted away. The silence between breaths carried meaning, a language of the soul that had been waiting to be spoken. Trust, fragile and tentative at first, began to weave itself into the rhythm of closeness, stitching together wounds left open for far too long. Every heartbeat became a drum of reassurance, every touch a thread binding what had been frayed and fragile. The connection was not fleeting. It was an anchoring, a rediscovery of the truth that love, in its deepest form, had never been lost. It was astonishing how quickly the heart remembered its capacity for joy, for intimacy, for belonging. The warmth of another's presence wrapped around in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. It demanded surrender, yet offered safety. It asked for vulnerability, yet promised understanding. There was a quiet electricity in simply being near, in sharing glances and touches, in speaking softly in the spaces between laughter and sighs. The soul, long dormant, stirred, stretching its wings and rediscovering its voice in the gentle rhythm of shared warmth and unspoken understanding. Every motion, every breath, every sigh became a declaration. The night was no longer merely physical. It was a reclamation, a resurrection of intimacy that had been thought lost. The walls that had once guarded the heart from pain now framed the space in which trust could blossom, where passion could intertwine with tenderness, and where desire could become something profound and sustaining. The rediscovery of love was not about possession or need. It was about recognition, acceptance, and the extraordinary beauty of being seen fully, without pretense or fear. There was an intimacy in every shared glance, every lingering touch, every whispered word that transcended the physical. The skin knew what the heart had longed to feel. The body responded to the soul's awakening. Each embrace carried a history of pain and healing, of loneliness and awakening, of fear and courage intertwined. The night became a canvas on which the deepest truths were painted: trust, vulnerability, desire, and love, all existing simultaneously, raw and unrestrained, yet delicate in their beauty. It was impossible not to notice the small details: the way fingers traced the curve of a shoulder, the gentle press of lips against skin, the warmth that seemed to emanate from not just touch, but the quiet, steady acceptance of one being fully present with another. The soul felt the touch before the body did, recognizing the authenticity, the sincerity, the rare, luminous clarity of connection that had been absent for too long. It was more than passion. It was a revelation, a confirmation that intimacy could exist without fear, and that love could be rediscovered even after years of disillusionment. Every sound, every movement, every shared breath became a hymn to rediscovered love. The laughter that bubbled up between moments of closeness was not casual. It was the release of tension held for too long, a celebration of trust, of surrender, of the joy of being seen and accepted. The night, though it carried the thrill of desire, was anchored in something far more enduring: the recognition that two hearts, long dormant and cautious, could reconnect in ways that honored the past, embraced the present, and hinted at a future filled with possibility. There was a clarity in the awakening that felt almost miraculous. The heart, once armored and wary, now beat openly and without pretense. The body, once tense and restrained, now responded freely and wholly. The mind, once crowded with doubts and cautions, now settled into the gentle rhythm of presence, surrendering to the truth that love, once lost or abandoned, could be found again in the most unexpected moments. The night became a sacred space where trust, intimacy, desire, and connection converged, revealing the profound, irreplaceable beauty of love rediscovered. It was astonishing to realize how much had been missing, how hollow days had felt, how empty the nights had been. And yet, in this rediscovery, there was no regret, only gratitude, for the walls that had protected, for the lessons learned, and for the extraordinary gift of a night that reminded the heart of its capacity to feel, to trust, and to love again. The soul, once cautious and wary, now embraced the warmth of another being fully, without fear, without hesitation, with a sense of wonder and awe at the depth of what had been awakened. As the night deepened, and the quiet hum of the world faded into the background, there was a profound realization. Love was not confined to fleeting moments, nor was it merely a physical exchange. It was a reclamation, a revival, a recognition of what had always existed beneath the surface. Trust had been restored, intimacy had been reclaimed, and a truth long buried had been brought gently back into the light. In the stillness of the night, in the lingering warmth, in the soft, steady presence of connection, it became clear: love had not been lost, it had only been waiting to be remembered. Thank you for sharing this journey of rediscovery, passion, and trust. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of love that awaken the soul. Every story here reminds us that even after pain, connection, intimacy, and true love can find us again. Hit the bell so you never miss a moment of passion. vulnerability, and the raw beauty of love rediscovered.